Thank you. Climate smart landscapes. I'd like to discuss 3 points with you this morning. What is a landscape? Climate smart landscapes in terms of wins and losses. And the third point, the landscape approach. You can dive into Wikipedia or to Google and come up with a definition of landscape that incorporates the physical elements, the human elements, and the transitory elements. Perhaps a better definition, though, and I apologize for the change in formatting between my software and the computer here, is landscapes are not what only lies before our eyes, but what lies within our heads. And if we look at our 13 billion hectares of landscape that we have on our planet, it's largely composed of 6 elements: croplands, pastures, tree plantations, natural forests, deserts and wetlands. Although proportionately, they're not all of the same. And you can see that agriculture and forestry account for more than 2/3 of our landscape. If you wanted to add the urban land area in that as well, it would be a little slither at the bottom. And so this is what lies inside our heads in the way that we approach dealing with landscape issues, in the way that we sectorialize agriculture, forestry, and environmental issues. And what lies before our eyes in the landscape is much more integrated mosaic, interacting groups and land areas that we're seeking to manage and exploit and maintain for the future. And so what is the best way to achieve the 4 goals of climate smart agriculture? Of productivity and income, of sequestration and mitigation, reduced emissions, and greater resilience or ability to adapt. Is it to take those sectors and continue with the silo approach? And if it is not, then why are the mechanisms that we're using to address those, payments for environmental services, RED, and climate smart agriculture, being viewed in a sectoral way? Our second point, climate smart wins and losses. Those 4 objectives and that wonderful sweet spot that Sonia alluded to is fantastic when we can achieve them all simultaneously. But will we get those quadruple wins, or will there need to be trade-offs? Those are the 16 possibilities with those 4 variables. And of course, we love to have the situation of 4 wins. We know that the IAASTD warned us against just chasing productivity and income. We know we can achieve something such as zero grazing of ruminants, but we won't reduce emissions from those. Fertilized maize and poor soils, where we're not helping farmers adapt and will have increased emissions, are offset against sequestration and productivity and income. And of course, we do want to avoid the situation of cutting down Amazon rainforest, planting rubber, only for it to be eaten by or to be destroyed by pests and diseases. So, of course, we want the 4 wins. 3 are great, but those questionable areas, and how will we look at that diverse landscape before us? And I don't know what's gone wrong at all with this slide, is looking at water use efficiency and plotting annuals and perennials, showing that where we have an abundance of land and a shortage of water, we're seeking to maximize returns to water and not maximize returns to land. And so what are our information and knowledge gaps and needs? A conceptual framework, better data sources, modelling, more attention to monitoring and evaluation, trade-off analyses, indicators, matrices and indices. If we have 2 landscapes before us, how do we know which one is better adapted, which one is more resilient? We can measure productivity and income, we can measure sequestration, we can measure reducing emissions. How do you measure adaptation? What are the metrics for that? And therefore, how do countries and regional bodies and international groups make decisions based on those pieces of information? Lastly, the landscape approach. It was much mentioned at Rio+20, but a lot of it has been taken up with an almost religious zeal. Of course we need the landscape approach. And yet there is no formal definition for that. It's not going to apply in all situations in that quadruple win. So how are we reconciling this need, this belief in something without quantifying it and characterizing it? And we would propose 4 underlying principles. For the landscape approach to make sense and operate across nested and interacting social and political scales. It's got to make sense for the farmer, it's got to make sense for the community, it's got to make sense for the watershed, should make sense as well for the local governance and national legislators. To make sense and operate across nested and overlapping biophysical scales. To involve multiple and defined sectors and stakeholders. And lastly, to seek synergies, but to also recognize we'll be managing and trying to reduce trade-offs. So it combines the elements of people, place and purpose. And in essence, is about the right practice for the right people in the right place for the right reasons. Let's take a soil map of Ethiopia, such as this one. Wonderful paint-by-numbers diagram where you can, if we focus into an area in the east of Ethiopia, this area that is about 10 kilometers by 15 kilometers, we can see some vertisols, some alluvial soils, some shallow rocky soils, but how does that help a farmer? If we go to much greater resolution in using our knowledge, we can actually look at that, for that exact same area, at a 30 meter by 30 meter resolution, the soil organic carbon, to guide better decisions on what land managers, the farm and landscape, need to do. The same for soil erosion prevalence. If you were someone in charge of a subnational jurisdiction, a local area of land, you could use that information to manage the vegetation, the soils, the carbon, and the other resources in that landscape. You can also do it at national scale, and here it's plotted at 30 meter by 30 meter resolution for the country of Malawi, both for soil organic carbon and soil pH. We've also got a lot to learn in climate-smart agriculture from the problems we encountered with REDD. The market alone is not going to solve the deforestation problem, certainly not at €5 a tonne. It might solve it at €100 a tonne, but we're way off that mark. We have enormous problems internationally. It took us 6 years to define what a forest was. We have the land use, land cover conundrum. If you're flying over an area of land and you take a photograph and you see, yes, that's grass, and produce one of those lovely paint-by-numbers diagrams, does it really help? When some of that grass is pasture and some of that grass is a golf course. So we need measures that combine not only land cover, but also land use. And forestry and deforestation suffers from the fact that REDD is only partial accounting, and climate-smart agriculture will do the same if it ring fences just croplands. Which is why, with a number of groups, we're studying it much more intensely here in 9 10,000 hectare blocks in Western Kenya to look at those trade-offs, to understand the methodologies, to understand the incentives of farmers and local district managers to manage those landscapes better. In a similar case with FAO and the MICA project, to look at those combining increasing productivity and reducing the environmental footprint through assessment of practices, awareness raising, testing in introduction, measurement, and having predictive tools. Land tenure will be key to making climate-smart agriculture work. This is a study of 22,000 aerial photographs over a 30-year time frame in Western Kenya and tying the farming practices back to land tenure. And you can see that there's a 2.5-fold economic effect from farmers having land tenure and a nearly 5-fold effect in long-term perennial investments such as trees by having land tenure. We also need to be reminded that those farmers and those landscapes are not non-interacting units, and the ways that they associate and the ways that they combine affect our ability to reach them and their motivations and behaviours as well. But there is some good news. It is possible that some systems can give us those 4 wins, in certain locations, but certainly not everywhere, such as the famous Fiderbia evergreen agriculture trees in croplands. And so, if the silo approach is not the best way for us to address these situations, and if indeed you had a barcode reader, you would read that as unsustainable agriculture, we need something that characterizes the mosaic, the interaction, the complexity at that landscape scale. And if you had a QR code reader, of course, that would read Climate Smart Landscapes. Thank you for listening.